Evening all. I'm just going to sort out the live stream window. So live stream, doing a live stream as well as on the PlayChess server. So I thought we'd revisit Gibraltar again this week. Still some really exciting games we didn't cover from previous weeks. That's a bit big over there. Okay, so how is the chessboard now? Is the chessboard okay on live stream? Well, hi everyone on livestream.com as well. So cool. Okay, so I picked some more decisive, interesting games that I thought were quite interesting from the Gibraltar Congress. I know there's been some other tournaments since then, but I played in Gibraltar 1 year, so it's sort of more personal to me to see how the games, there kind of more interesting personally. And okay, so in this game, Nigel Short that I want to show you was playing black, and he played actually a really powerful, it seemed to be really powerful, Nimzo-Indian defense against Salem. So d4 was played by Salem, and Nigel plays knight f6, and after c4 we have the Nimzo-Indian e6. So this is a tried and tested defense used in many World Championship matches, and often nowadays, a lot of players play knight f3 to avoid the pin, that dreaded Nimzovich pin. But actually knight c3 was played anyway, so not Queen's Indian territory, just Nimzo-Indian, invited. Bishop b4. Now I think this is Rubinstein's favourite move, e3. Someone at my chess club called Steve Weston recommended this to me when I was a junior. Steve Weston was a really nice guy. Unfortunately, he had some health issues. He's no longer with us, but I remember him recommending to me this Rubinstein move, e3, as being one of the best things you can do against the Nimzo. It keeps the centre solid. It does lock in the bishop, but later, if you get double pawns, later maybe you can also like liberate the bishop, later, and have a strong centre. So okay, e3's got some things going for it. There's a lot of opening theory on it, of course. So c5 was played by Nigel here. Black is trying to create a good climate for the knights to work very well in a sort of blocked, closed position. And white plays, okay, a seemingly passive move, knight ge2. So he's blocking actually that bishop away from the natural d3 square. But of course he's avoiding the possibility of double pawns at the moment. The knight could recapture on c3 if bishop takes c3 now. So is it punishing black for that c5 move? Well, Nigel's not worried, I think. He just plays d6 now, which often carries with it the idea of, say knight c6 and e5, just to try and provoke, say, d5 and get the knight over here maybe, close the position up, make these knights look really good in a closed block position. Standard Nimzo-Indian stuff, probably, it's heavily theoretical still. White plays a3, wanting that bishop pair, but black does not oblige. Nigel retreats the bishop to a5 here. And now, of course, with the white bishop unable to come naturally to d3, it decides, someone decides to fianchetto it. He plays g3, putting the bishop potentially across this diagonal, which seems kind of useful maybe. So after castles, bishop g2. So we have an interesting position without the double pawns. So what are white's trump cards? What are black's trump cards? It's difficult to say at this stage. There's no clear-cut structural damage for white. Black is content now just to develop a piece with knight c6. Now white castles. And now, okay, we've got a lot of choices for black. Maybe moving the knight to play e5 or just playing e5. Potentially, maybe bishop d7 might be considered. The move Nigel plays is actually rook b8. As if, I don't know, potentially it looks as though a6 and protecting this knight and then b5 later might be useful to try and target c4. c4 is a bit vulnerable in this position with the bishop on this diagonal. c4 control is a bit lessened, and so watch out for that c4 pawn in this game. For the moment, white now reinforces the c4 pawn by playing b3, and Nigel does indeed go for this queenside plan, or threaten to play a queenside attack, but for the moment after a6 he cannot play b5 at the moment because of this bishop eyeing c6. So his next move, if he really wants to play b5, he's going to have to prepare it a bit more. But in the meantime, does white want to wait for this plan? White actually plays a move which puts pressure down the d file actually and simplifies the tension, the central pawn tension. White plays d takes c5 here. So after d takes c5, boringly exchanges queens. Queen takes d8 is played. Okay, queens off might be less interesting for the attacking player, but okay, rook takes d8 might be answered possibly by bishop takes c6, giving black horrible double pawns. Then maybe white would follow by targeting c5, potentially, you know, with knight a4, and the shoe would be on the other foot in terms of double pawns. So actually maybe Nigel is wise for that, or maybe other reasons, to play knight takes d8. So he's still got this potential plan on the cards, b5, but the queens have come off. The pawn structure is symmetrical at the moment for both sides if we look at the pawn structure. So is it a big deal for either side actually, or does black stand a tiny bit better? If white tries to prevent b5 with a4, then of course b4 is a bit weak and this bishop's maybe useful on a5. White actually decides here to play the move rook b1. So he doesn't seem to mind b4. Maybe his idea is if b5 he just takes and then maybe plays b4. Possible. Okay, so Nigel actually doesn't play the natural looking b5, he plays bishop c7. And white plays b4 anyway, which has a side effect actually, which is undesirable, I think. Maybe white's idea is to coordinate, you know, pressure, the fianchettoed bishop, you know, coordinate on b7. And it looks attractive superficially, but maybe c4 is a little bit weaker here. If only black could get a knight to e5, then c4 would be a target. Isn't c4 like an Achilles heel of white's position here? After this b4, well, it has to be proven, but this next move seems to seek to prove it. In fact, knight d7, the knight can now potentially come to e5 hitting c4, or even b6 to c4. Okay, but for the moment white puts a break on black's play with knight e4, putting pressure on c5. Black defends, and again it seems as though, especially with this bishop protecting the rook against bc's and rook takes b8, it seems as though knight e5 is on the cards to attack c4 here. So actually white's next move deprives black of knight e5. White plays f4. That square's taken away from these pieces. So is c4 such a big deal, one might ask again. Okay, f5 is now played. The knight's kicked, goes back there. Now knight f7, and it emerges again that f5 actually vacated f7, and now knight d6 might pounce on c4. Does white want to stop that as well, or how can white stop, in fact, knight d6? So this b4 was quite committal actually. It seems as though black never got to play b5 but provoked white to play b4, which weakens c4, and now this dangerous maneuver is on the cards. So the question is, has white already at move 17 been outplayed here. What do you think? Pardon me. What do you think about this position? Do you prefer white or do you prefer black here? Do you find that there's compensation elsewhere for white here, or is white just sitting waiting to be done over just because of that c4 pawn? What are your thoughts here, everyone? If I give you 10 or 20 seconds starting from now, just digest this position. Do you prefer white or do you prefer black? Lasker2 says I like black. Anyone else? White, Piscator? Any reason, Piscator? I don't know. White's position to me looks dangerously close to losing a pawn, an important pawn. Note also the white bishop. I don't want to bias you, but the white bishop is actually trapped behind dark square pawns here. How is this bishop going to be useful? Okay, in the game now, white plays e4. So knight d6 actually happens now, and there's no way to defend c4 here. How does white defend c4? He takes on f5, or he finds a way now. Hang on a sec. He finds a way. E takes f. Now, if e takes f, then knight c4, there'll be bishop d5 check, wouldn't there? That's a bit naughty. So rook takes f5 is played, giving black a backward pawn to hold up that d5 control. Perhaps. g4, the rook goes back, and now it really looks as though c4 is going to drop. Isn't it? It does in fact drop now after f5. But e6, surely this might be dangerous. Knight takes c4. White puts more pressure on e6 with knight f4. And the d5 control looks ominous here. This d5 control. Bishop e5 hitting the knight on c3. And offering up at the same time, you know, why can't white play f takes e hitting d7? Well, he does do that. After bishop takes c3, e takes, check, king moves, bishop takes d7. Still, black has nicked a pawn. Black is a pawn up here, and it's the c4 pawn. And in fact, this bishop still looks silly on c1. This knight looks like a Nimzovician knight. But isn't there bishop d5 check winning the knight? I think this backfires tactically. This is behind the scenes variation. In the game, white played b takes c. If he had played check, king h8 and try and take this, I think there's a disaster here for white. Can you all see it if I give you 10 seconds? 10 seconds starting from now. What would black play here? Okay, I think I've seen it. I haven't really checked this. I don't think it's bishop c6, Lasker2. If bishop c6, then the knight can interpose. You want to make bishop c6 a little bit more effective, so what would you do to avoid the defensive possibility of a block on d5? I would say this looks tempting. Get rid of knight d5 as a resource. Then the two bishops mate the white king. Okay, so in the game, in this position, black is clearly a pawn up without bishop d5 to worry about, actually. So white plays b takes c5. And now black plays bishop takes c5. We're still, you know, that bishop on that diagonal for this tactic not working. Check, king h8, not worrying about bishop takes c4. So white avoids that trap. He plays rook b3. Still, black's a pawn up, 2-1 pawn majority. He moves the knight, he's nicked a pawn so far. Maybe the threat is stronger than the execution. Black's threatened b5 play caused white to lose the c4 pawn in effect so far. Bishop b2, and now the knight supported. And also look at black's position. He's got lots of possibilities with his bishop. g4's weak, king's weak. Looks a bit horrible. Rook h3, or is it? Hang on hang on a sec. There's bishop e5 and knight g6 now on the cards. How does black parry that? Well, here he just plays bishop takes g4. Not worried about bishop e5. He can just take the rook. Okay, so rook h4. And now he defends against this idea of knight g6. He plays bishop f5, removing the possibility of takes and knight g6. He's removed that possibility. The bishop standing guard now of g6. Still a pawn up. Okay. In fact, 2 pawns up now. 2-1. 2-1. It's all good news still. Rook h5. Okay. Now knight g6 is played. And tactically, black's holding up this position. You know, rook takes, knight takes, pawn takes. We'll be protecting f5. It seems black is okay, superficially anyway. Rook g5. Now bishop d3 is played, hitting f1. Rook g4. What is going on with rook g4 here? Well, it's setting a trap. If bishop takes f1, what could white play now? 10 seconds starting from now. I hope you see a winning combination here if bishop takes f1 was played. Everyone see it? Okay. I think it's knight takes g6, forcing hg, and then that would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Because the bishop's covering g8. That would be mates. So in this position, Nigel doesn't take the rook. He plays rook takes f4. Now that simplifies things after rook takes. Now he doesn't also fall in for another trap. If he'd played knight takes, then that's embarrassing again. That's mate again. Whoops. His king's just been mated. No, he plays here check to force knight takes f4 to be more effective. It's check now. And here white resigned. So quite tactical skirmish in many ways. So say rook takes f4, but you might ask, is there an easy way for black to win this position? Yes, there is. I think if I give you 10 seconds, what does black have here in this position to win material? 10 seconds starting from now. Yeah, rook e2 check would fork king and bishop, and this is guarding here this back row, so no problem. Okay, so white resigned in that position. That's why it looks bad. So let's have a quick overview and summary of this game. So a Nimzo Indian, where it seems as though black's only sort of active plan was to play a6 and b5, and it was sort of interrupted now with white playing for b4 and exchanging off queens, and this kind of, in a way, this created a losing weakness, this c4 pawn, the way the game played out. After f5, black's just given a plan of knight here to here, to get a pawn. And despite white trying to generate some play, undermining e6, it seems as though that pawn was actually kind of significant. And now some tactics relating to white's king safety meant that there wasn't a tactical disaster on the diagonal. That in this position, after the check, forcing the king into that corner, that this knight became immune to bishop d5 check because of this rook f4 tactic. So the knight couldn't be taken. Rook b3. So a pawn up, and now Nigel is also going to win another pawn soon. So he plays bishop takes g4, winning another pawn. White setting cheapos as well now, of course. Bishop takes and knight g6. So these bishops are pointing at the black king. But it's all under control, it seems. Knight g6. Bishop d3. Now rook takes f4. Check. And it's a disaster for white tactically. So white resigned here. Okay, so that was the kind of game starting from winning a pawn and ending in a tactical skirmish. Let's have a look at another game. Another Nigel short win, not covered so far from this event. Now this is a Tango fascination game. So one of my favourite films was The Scent of a Woman, where it was mentioned if you tango and you misdo your steps, you can just carry on. That's the advantage of the tango. There's an opening called Tango, Knight c6. So the knight wants to like tango over here, and you create these dark square weaknesses in white's position if d5. But knight c6, the standard response is often, so Nigel's played knight c6 against a very strong women grandmaster, Koneru Humpy, who was challenging for the Women's World Championship earlier in the year against Yifan Hu. So wasn't it? Oh, am I mistaken? I think she was challenging for the Women's World Championship. So knight c6, I think the standard recommended move against knight c6 is to play knight f3 to keep things solid. But no, white played c4, and now Nigel played e5. And I love this as black when this happens. You get lovely dark square pressure. So knight ce7, the knight can go to an attacking position, and maybe bishop c5 later. And look at all these dark squares. Knight c3, knight g6, g3, and now a5, marking out, you know, some squares like c5 here. So this is nice. A bishop can be put there. It sort of restrains a3 and b4 later as well. Bishop g2, bishop c5. The bishop's also got a pigeonhole to retreat back if kicked, and but that wasn't used actually here. After knight a4, the bishop didn't go back. Instead, we saw bishop b4 check. Interestingly, after bishop d2, in fact, the pawn is just used as a recapturing mechanism. Nigel just plays d6. He's content with a bit of pressure on the a file. It doesn't matter about the double pawns. Kind of dynamic with his pawn structures. Very frequently in the Gibraltar event, you look at Nigel Short's games and look at the pawn structures. Extremely dynamic, aggressive. So here, he is accepting doubled pawns. What is he going to get for them? So white plays bishop takes b4, and after a takes b4, this knight's a little bit misplaced. It might take time to get back in the game with some rerouting. Maybe white prepares for that now. b3 as well as fixing down b4. Maybe a3 later as well, and target this pawn. Bishop d7 hitting the knight. Knight b2. Now rook a3. which gives an answer to queen d2 now, because then queen a8 would hit a2. So the point's revealed. Rook a3, what a move for queen a8 potentially. In fact, even without queen d2, after the next move knight f3, queen a8 is played immediately. So pressure already on a2, and white meekly defends now. Queen b1. So the game continues, and I think black has a nice grip on dark squares with pressure here of the castles. How do you rate the opening now? Do you prefer white or do you prefer black? If I give you 20 seconds to evaluate this outcome of the opening, so starting from now, white or black? Black, Nc3. Maybe white did something wrong, yes. Nc3 writes. Anyone else? Anyone? Okay, I think I prefer black myself. Nigel here plays bishop g4 actually, he doesn't routinely castle. Okay, so knight d1 looks as though, okay, that's a useful central knight maybe. After castles knight e3, hitting that bishop on g4. Does it move? No. Queen a5, not minding losing that bishop. The queen's now got access to a few more squares, and also the rook can now triple on a2. Triple battery. Knight c2, seemingly winning the exchange, because where is the rook moving? But no, there's a resource here for black. Bishop f5, pinning that pesky knight to the queen. Knight fe1. And now just in time, not having to worry about e4, it seems, or does he? Is e4 on the cards to play knight takes a3? Nigel's not worried. He just plays rook a8, triple battery time on a2. So you might ask, well, e4, surely e4 interrupting the pin on the knight. e4 is played. What has Nigel done? Has he just lost the exchange? Is this a tactical disaster? Okay. Okay, so he plays actually. Nigel plays now. Bishop takes e4. Not minding the loss of the exchange. After bishop takes e4, knight takes e4, he's losing the exchange. Knight takes a3. But is he? Hang on a sec. There's a knight d2 on the cards, which he plays. Queen c2. And in fact, now, ingeniously, he just plays b takes a3 and the rook's still trapped. Delayed capture of the rook. The queen's now protecting d2. So that's pretty neat. Okay. So he's getting his material back with advantage. b4. Or is he? After b4, it's interrupting the protection. And now there's going to be knight d3. Knight d3, and the rook can escape. Wow. So why is the exchange up after all? Has this gone wrong? How many pawns for the exchange though now? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All of black's pawns are intact. So it's 2 pawns for the exchange. Rook ft1, 2 pawns for the exchange, check, and the knight goes beautifully to d4. So white's got a bit of problems here, the exchange up, for 2 pawns. Queen a6, putting pressure on that c4 pawn, like we saw in the previous game. c4 seems to be a very nice target for black in many of these openings that Nigel plays. And in fact, how is it defensible here? I don't know if rook c1 was possible. It wasn't played in this position. In fact, it was invited for Nigel to take on c4 with this next move. Knight b4. So maybe white wanted pressure down the c-file, giving up that pawn. Took rook ac1, pressure down the c-file, rook takes c7, lateral pressure as well. Is this getting a bit dangerous for black? The exchange down. h6. Okay. So queen c3. So some smoke is cleared. So what do we think about this position now? Some tactical skirmishes going on with black now the exchange down for 2 pawns. So was that a terrible accident we've just witnessed? Who prefers white and black now? If I give you 20 seconds to have a look at this. Vax and white, because of the exchange up, but it's 2 pawns. Don't they mean anything? There's a big knight on d4. Can I bias you to say black? There's a huge knight on d4 here. There's some potential target pawns here as well. Okay. So rook a4 dislodges the knight on b4, and in fact d5 is immediately under fire. So white is prompted immediately to give back the exchange now to hold on to d5. White plays rook takes d4 after e takes. Now instead of taking on d4, well that would lose b4. White plays queen f3 hitting f7. Okay, so that has to be defended. And you might wonder about knight e5 here. This is looking scary. Possibly check, and this is a disaster. Check. You know, getting into the king. That looks horrible. Okay, so actually Nigel here cautiously goes queen e8. So rook takes b7. Protecting b4. So is white fighting her way back? Only a pawn down. Okay, about knight e5. Queen moves to b3. Rook a8. But this is a passed pawn here. This knight looks strong. Knight a6. Queen d8 is played now. Queen d8. So it gives options to come out, maybe out and about. Okay, so knight c7, rook c8, now knight b5. Now the pass pawn is pushed, d3, offering up a3. Is this going to destabilize white to win this a3 pawn and restore material equality? Knight takes a3. So all Nigel is left with now that the smoke is cleared is basically a seemingly dangerous pass pawn, more central knight. The rook's on a useful file. d2. Now there's a threat of rook c1 and d1. So knight b1, hitting that pawn immediately. Knight c4. Defending the pawn, and threatening also knight a5, forking queen and rook. Queen moves. Queen A5, protecting D2, hitting A2, also putting pressure on D5. Rook E7. Queen now goes to B4. Is the queen being used to herd this pawn? If we can get here, maybe. Or is that the plan? Queen F5. The rook has to protect F7. Queen goes back now, protecting maybe B2. Now rook B8, putting pressure on that knight. Okay. So one question here is, can white just return back to F5? Is that possible? Possibly in this position, knight E5, you know, protecting F7. Because now queen takes B1 and is a threat. So maybe white didn't want to play queen F5. White played knight C3 instead. And after queen B2 actually resigned, maybe the position was now hopeless because of this dangerous passed pawn. So a very deep tactical skirmish after the opening, which black seemed to be doing well, just leading into this very dangerous passed D pawn, but with black's king safety being in question at many points as well. So let's have a look at this game in overview and summary. So a tango, with this A5. Okay, so the bishop came out to C5. Now the point of the A5 pawn was revealed just to let the capture on B4 occur. And now we have this fast A-file pressure with queen A8 coming up. So black seems to be doing very nicely out of the opening, but deliberately almost getting his rook trapped now soon with this queen A5. So even though there's a pin, he gets two pawns for the exchange now after this tactical sequence after E4. Two pawns for the exchange. It's quite vicious tactics from both sides. Pawn sacrificed by white to get the rook out. Two pawns for the exchange. But now black has the pressure, but immediately white sacrifices C4 for pressure on that C file, which seems to be dangerous. And again, another exchange sack from white this time. Just as things were becoming difficult, didn't want to lose D5, that would be the end of the game if this knight retreated. So instead taking out D4 and going on the attack with queen F3. And now in the final phase it seems black's asset was really this D pawn coming into play. Even sacrificing A3 to celebrate the D pawn advance. Now playing rook B8. So I think going to answer queen F5 with knight E5. Because queen takes B1 would attack F5. So knight C3. Queen B2, end of game. Okay, the pawn's too strong. I think if queen F5, by the way, in this position, I think rook F8, and it's going to be difficult for white. This sort of thing is going to be difficult to defend. Okay, let's go on to another game. This time, Michael Adams also did well in the Gibraltar, and we haven't had a look at any of his games yet. So he had some nice wins. He had a very good score as well. So here's one of his games we can have a look at. Okay, so this was in round 1 against Natalia Zhukova. So Michael Adams playing white plays e4. Let's flip the board. So d6 was played, going into a perk defense, or modern. They transpose a lot into each other. So bishop e3, which is a very aggressive move, sometimes with the idea of f3, queen d2, castle queenside. Get rid of the bishops later, you know, hack and slay, that sort of thing. Bishop e3. So black's not in a rush to castle with bishop g7. Black actually plays a6. And now actually we don't see f3. Maybe this is less effective because of plans like this. Or you'd think it supports e4. Strangely, h3 is played. So it looks as though there's a more positional approach. g4, maybe bishop g2, g4, g5. Or just to stop knight g4s maybe. Okay, so to be able to play f4 without knight g4. So after bishop g7, in fact, f4 is played here. Black castled now. Knight f3. b5 for black. Looks logical to try and put pressure on the white centre. e5. Knight of d7. Sort of hyper modern system from black. Bishop d3. But this bishop is pointing at the king over here. Knight b6. Now white doesn't routinely castle kingside. White plays queen e2. As if castling queenside is on the cards. And maybe now h4, h5 to surprise black. Hack and slay attack. After all that. Because after all, there's less resources now around the black king. This knight's travelled over there. So why not try and go for the king here? So after knight 8 d7, in fact, white castles queenside. So, who do you prefer in this position now? White or black? 20 seconds to evaluate this opening position. Starting from now. Who do you prefer, white or black? Biscato writes white. Secures no writes black. Let white get away with lots of things. On chess space of Qxd8 white, Tristessa white. I think most people surely would prefer white because the lack of king safety, the tearing open of the h-file, g6 is an underminable target. Okay, so let's see how the game pans out. Is it going to be a simple, crude, effective attack? e6, go for it. h4 now. Bishop b7. h5, rip open the lines, hack and slay the king. b4, trying to counter-attack on the centre, like e4 control, d5 control. Get rid of this knight. It goes to e4 actually. Now black plays bishop takes e4 with the idea of d5 now, locking down the centre, fixing it. And now c5, as though c4 is going to trap the bishop. Or cd would open the c-file. It looks a little bit dangerous maybe. But for the moment, white ignores that. c4 plays hg. Black plays hg. And again, this idea of trapping the bishop is totally ignored for tempo here. Michael Adams plays g4. Because actually now with g4 we have queen h2 as a threat. And maybe f5 and bishop h6. And this looks dangerous. Rook e8 is played. Evacuation plans are being made for the black king. Queen h2. It might be a little bit too late. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Check f5, bishop h6 and knight g5 look quite menacing. C takes d. Is there a c-file hope? But the bishop protects c2. How long is it going to take for black to arrange a counter-attack here? Bishop takes d4, queen c7. And now more lines are broken up. Although queen c7 and the bishop and the knight eye e5, but the queen is also eyeing e5, the bishop and the knight here. So white can play f5, trying to squash black to death with f6. Where's this bishop going to go? Nowhere. E takes after g takes. f6 is on the cards. Menacing. So here black gets desperate. Black plays knight takes e5, knight sack. After knight takes... No, it's not a knight sack. Pardon me. Sorry. Let's look at this position after f5. After e takes, black has 1, 2, 3, 4. White has 1, 2, 3. It's a pawn sack by Michael Adams. Let's open up the lines. Okay, let's get that clear. It's a pawn sack of e5. So knight takes e5, bishop... Sorry, not bishop takes e5. If black plays bishop takes here, it looks as though something horrible is about to happen. Possibly just check an f6 threatening queen h8 mate. So in fact black decides to take with the rook. White's attack carries on. He's not interested in winning the exchange here. And also queen e5 might be on b2. Someone's saying queen h8. I don't think queen h8 works, you know, on bishop takes e5. You say queen h8, right? No, that does work. Sorry. Yeah, Mustang fan, you get 50 points for that. Because bishop takes. Yeah, that's quite good actually, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's even better. You know, that's a slight improvement to. In this position, yes. Forget check. Yeah, this is quicker. Check on h8 is quicker. That's quite funny, isn't it? Yeah. So there's a reason for all these grandmaster moves, yeah. Sorry. So rook takes e5 is only move then. Rook takes e5 is the only move. Okay. Oh dear. Oh dear. So fg. Oh dear. So the black king's had it after f6. Rook df1. Which now means horrible things are on the cards like check and rook takes f6, or maybe queen takes queen. The queen's loose as well here. So the defensive task seems quite big here for black. Black plays in this position knight d7. So now, interesting tactic. Quite logical maybe. Bishop f5. So there's no you know, this rook's kind of pinned. There's a threat now of bishop e6 among other things, or maybe just bishop takes and then queen mates, because if that takes, then we've got, you know, the f file. So I think black's overstretched here. I think black's had it actually. So knight f8. So now bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, queen h3, and okay, so queen h3. So what's going on now? Rook e1 is supported because the queen's supporting the bishop. Rook E1 among other things. So what happened in the game? In fact, after A5 Rook E1 was played, so the attack wave 2 now begins. Probably a short wave here, because black's the exchange down. Rook HF1. A4. Optimistic. Check. Knight takes. Check. King F8. Now the final blow. Rook takes F6 check. Okay, so in this position, black resigns. So if bishop takes, let's rule that out. Queen F7 is mate. If King E7, then probably Queen takes G7 is good. And then just, taking looks simple enough. Just a rook up. So that was quite a blast, wasn't it? Quite a hack attack. So what happened there? So probably not a good idea to play a bit too provocatively against Adams, as this game shows, with the double fianchetto. Let's have a look at that again. So Perk, sort of hypermodern systems, hypermodern theory, something Raymond Keane used to do a lot, double fianchetto systems. But it didn't seem to work out very well. So this attack looked already quite kind of dangerous here at this point. And I think one clever bit to speed up White's attack was letting the bishop be potentially trapped on c4. So there wasn't really enough time, it seems, to play c4. Well, because of this Queen H2. Shall we just quickly examine that? We didn't really examine that. Queen H2. What if Rook E8 here? Would that be much like the game, I wonder? Probably a bit or worse than the game. Maybe F5. Or bishop takes G6 even. Bishop could give itself up. It looks pretty dangerous, this stuff. So in the game, actually, black decided to play Rook E8 in advance. So then we saw this onslaught. C takes D4, just trying to use maybe the C file. F5, just sacrificing a pawn temporarily. So there's a lot of pressure going on here. Knight takes. So as pointed out, bishop takes is not possible because of Queen H8. Ouch. So Rook takes. F takes. F6. Rook D F1. It's horrible. Brutal game, really. Bishop F5. And it was vicious. So winning the exchange, keeping the queens on for this fight to reshuffle the rooks to E1 and F1, again, like this, to play bishop E6 soon. So one rook there, reshuffled, cabinet reshuffle. So A4 check, check, crashing through in the final position. So that was a nice, attractive game, I thought. So let's have a look at another game of Michael Adams. So that was quite a crush. Against Berg, who's a very exciting, dynamic player, who came actually to play in the London Classic. Let's have a look at that game. So that was quite fun. So Adams was black against Berg, Manuel Berg, who's a regular at Gibraltar, I think. He's played quite a lot in Gibraltar. So Emmanuel Berg plays E4. And Adams as black plays E5. So after knight F3, knight C6, we have Roy Lopez territory. So are we going to get a Marshall Gambit? Okay. Bishop A4, knight F6 after castles. It's all standard stuff so far. But now, instead of castling for a martial gambit, if castles, c3 d5, Adams actually plays d6 quieter play, so it's not martial. Okay, after c3 castles, h3 is quite Brad system. Knight b8, this little retreat to position the, maybe do that sort of thing. So knight bd7. Maybe he was concerned about being booked up against in his martial gambit, so he's switching to this to sort of get people to prepare multiple variations of the royal pairs. Bishop b7, knight f1. After rook e8, it looks fairly natural for both sides so far. Bishop f8. Now some things begin. Knight g5 hitting f7. Okay. Now if rook e7, knight f5. So rook e7 is not possible. So black is basically, I think, forced to play d5. The interesting thing is after e takes, not a recapture. I mean, maybe takes, then queen f3. Hitting f7 and d5. So in fact, a temporary pawn sack, knight c5. So he's going to knock out this and regain the pawn. But white now plays an interesting move. He plays d6. So what's happened here? White's going to be a pawn up. Black cannot take on d6 without losing f7. And if knight takes, surely there's a Zwishen's d takes c7. Or just queen takes b3, again renewing pressure on f7. So is f7 a problem here? Knight takes b3, queen takes b3, was played, queen d7. So white has snatched the pawn after d takes. 2 pawns up for the moment. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All his pawns there. And black is down to 6 pawns. 2 pawns up temporarily. But now 1 pawn up. With black having, dangerous bishop across the diagonal. So what's happened here? Black a pawn down. So the question to ask here is, after AB, let's say, do you prefer white, who's a pawn up, or black? Does black have adequate compensation here? Is this a strange sort of gambit? So white or black, who do you prefer here? I'll give you 20 seconds to try and evaluate this position, starting from now. So Curacao likes white. Mustang Fang Black's bishops look promising. Okay. Black's position looks more dynamic according to Z Mech T. So okay, white tries to gang up now on B5. Bishop c6 and now c4. But c4 weakens a little bit d4, doesn't it? And maybe this bishop later is going to be dangerous. B takes, d takes, and now rook b7, and also now there's pressure on the b file. Queen c2. Now this knight's evicted. It goes now to a seemingly unfortunate square in this position. So here's a big question. Why did the knight go to f3, allowing double pawns after takes? That doesn't look so good. So why couldn't white have played knight here? Is there a refutation here of knight here? If we go takes, is there something on the back row? Or what about this bishop b4? Whoops! Oh blimey! Oh blimey! Oh there! That's a bit embarrassing. Oh, that's nasty, isn't it? Oh dear, oh dear. That's nasty. If bishop d2, then you could take on an e4 and then take on d2. Whoops. So bishop b4 looks to be an emergent possibility. And couldn't bishop b4 have been played here then? That's the next question. In this position, you know, maybe there's rook d1, possibly attacking the queen to get away with that. But now after h6, okay, getting the knight back first. Okay, so the knight retreated for tactical reasons, it seems. So rook d1 here, you want to test out. I guess we should logically test this out. Rook d1 here. I think queen c7 hits the rook now, and we've got two pieces en prise. So this looks a bit strange for white, that he's got these liabilities in this position after h6. You know, this bishop b4, this queen c7 if needed. So knight f3 was played. And it looks horrible. Bishop takes f3, takes, and now bishop b4 was played, seemingly winning the exchange. Rook e takes e5. He wins the exchange. He wins h3. Ouch! Doesn't black also now just double and come to the 8th rank? It looks disastrous. Oh dear. Bishop d2, rook d7. Okay, I think white's position has collapsed tactically. Rook ed8, threatening rook d1 check. Parries that. Knight h5, so he's going to come to f4 if unchallenged. Horrible g2. Takes, but now this row is dangerous for the king. Bishop a5, rook e8, and now there's different rook invasions possible. Queen a4, queen h3, protecting that rook, and now threatening rook e6 and check. Queen c6, plays rook e6 now. It doesn't matter about queen d7, there's rook g6 check, winning horribly. So check. After king h7, white resigned. That was horrible, wasn't it? So what a terrible outcome of winning that pawn. So white resigns here. He's faced with horrible rook g6. Is the exchange down? These two pawns are too far away. His king's smashed up. So let's go back. So that was horrible. So seemingly quiet Breyer, just losing a pawn in a dynamic fashion. I suppose you could argue a bit like Aronian lost a pawn in Roy Lopez. Creates some interesting dynamism sometimes, just losing a pawn. It seems 2 pawns up, but his position is about to be crunched. In retrospect, it doesn't look like a good idea, this rook a5, creating tactical liabilities around the shop. These tactical, like, loose pieces. So c4 looks as though it's weakening b4 as well. in retrospect, easy to say. So he took on c4, and he plays rook b7, which gets control of b4, kicks the queen. And the interesting thing is not bishop b4 immediately, but h6 first. And so we see this knight f3, and it looks horrible now. White just collapsed tactically, so he just double pawns, bishop b4 winning the exchange. He like lost the position now. It's lost, isn't it? That was a quick loss. From a position 2 pawns up. He went to 1 pawn up and then lost the exchange, then lost his king shortly after. So why wasn't rook d1 played after the fork? If we examine that critical position here, do you really want to examine knight f3, or should we try that knight e4 again? Zmec T. Well, okay. The first question is, in this position, rook d1 here. If we tried that, what would happen here? Interesting. Any ideas? Could black try giving up the queen for 2 rooks? Is that any good? I'm not sure about that. Maybe safer is queen takes h3. So the rook moves somewhere. Let's say rook b5, right? This seems better than the game continuation, doesn't it? I can't see how white's crushing black. Sorry, how black's crushing white that easily. Don't know if any of you. It's a pawn up, isn't it, for black? Taking the rook. Black's a pawn up. Yeah. e4. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure actually, really. This rook d1 idea here. Interesting. Maybe black's just, slightly better. He played in a disastrous way. He played he just gave up the exchange. Okay, so rook d1. Queen takes d1, someone asked. Queen takes d1. Queen takes. Bishop takes. It is 2 rooks, and the rooks can later play, rook d8 and rook d7 and come to d1. Maybe white didn't want that. Yeah, I mean that's a possibility, isn't it? That the 2 rooks might actually be really good here. Rook c7 says Fritz. Sorry, Lasker 2. Can I just ask you? In this position after rook d1, is it queen takes h3 as the best move? Is queen takes h3 given as the best move? I wonder if it is. I think it probably would be. Here. Yes. All right. Queen takes h3. Now after rook b5, yes. Okay. Okay. That's that requires some analysis why rook d1 wasn't played, but it looks as though our general IT, according to Deep Fritz, yes, queen takes h3. It looks as though it's better than the game continuation, but it's a bit miserable for white, isn't it? Then e4. Oh, to play e takes and then mate on g2. I see, e4. If takes. Wonder what happens here if just f takes e. Oh, there's knight g4. Hold on a sec. Just that's looking dangerous. Oh, blimey. Oh, blimey. Takes. Can't quite see it. Check. There's no knight e3 because of takes. I'm not sure about this without engine checking. Oh, sorry. Rook takes b5 first. So takes. Rook takes b5. C takes. Now knight g4, I guess. Is this right? In this position, knight g4. Is there a better move than knight g4? It's just a bit better for black. One pawn. Right. Okay, so that's interesting that white collapsed then. Okay. Oh, h5. h5. Yeah. Let's play h4 maybe. Not knight g4. Okay, h5. So black will be better. Okay. Alright, so yeah. So that's a complicated game, and how white went seemingly disaster mode. The exchange down and the rooks coordinated. So that didn't need to happen, it seems. So I hope you've enjoyed this week. Maybe we can look at some more games from Gibraltar next week. Another couple of wins maybe of Adams and some other players next week. So yeah, I hope you got something out of these games. And got something out of it. So I'll put this on YouTube.com Kingscrusher. Okay, thanks very much for coming, and I'll see you all next week round about the same time. Okay, thanks very much.